Two boys walk through the scant shade of an orchard, far from the house where they are staying. It is just after midday, the sun is at its fiercest, no one else around. In this light, the land shimmers uncertainly before them. It hasn't rained for months. The vegetation, usually heavy with moisture, has turned pale and brittle. These past few days, the air itself has become so hot and dry that it singes the boys' throats when they breathe.
You just heard author Tash Aw reading from his novel The South, a family saga that takes in class, wealth, desire and difference. It was listed for the Booker Prize and has just been published in French by Flammarion as Le Sud. Tash, thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Now, in that passage you refer to these boys, not quite men, Jay and Chuan. You also mentioned the land, the place where they are. Tell us about the time and space of this novel.
The time and space are not named, but we understand that it's 1997 and it's in the far south of Malaysia. So Le Sud, the south, refers to the extreme south of the country. And they have travelled, Jay has travelled with his family from Kuala Lumpur to the extreme south, where his family has inherited a farm that is now abandoned and it's just very shabby and no longer productive. And there he meets Chuan, and a whole other life awaits him.
And like you say, they travel in the same country, but it's almost a different world because these two protagonists, Jay and Chuan, come from different backgrounds. They have different attitudes, outlooks. That's contrasted once again with their two fathers, men of a different generation. Tell us about the representations of masculinity in this book.
Well, all the men here are trying to find versions of masculinity that suit them. So the older ones, Jay's father and Chuan's father, are caught in this old-fashioned Asian view of what men should be: silent, long-suffering, authoritarian. And the younger boys, the younger men, as you say earlier, they're no longer children, but they're not quite men yet. They're trying to carve out an identity for themselves. They want more freedom. They want to be able to live life as they want to do.
And much of the novel recounts Jay's coming of age, especially when it comes to his own developing sexuality, his attraction to other young men. The book's set in 1997, as you said. At that time in Malaysia, there'd been extremely violent, it's quite strict, political and religious crackdowns on same-sex relationships. Is it fair to say that it was a very homophobic climate at that time?
You know, the weird thing is that I can't say it was, because the two things exist at the same time. So there's occasionally you have waves of official oppression and crackdowns, but at the same time you see queer people on the street all the time, having thriving lives. So the two coexist in a slightly uneasy way, but they do coexist. And within this schism, Jay is coming of age. He knows that he's queer. He just doesn't know how to live it.
And almost 30 years on, would you say in Malaysia that attitudes have evolved, the climate has changed?
I would say sadly not. I think maybe there's actually been even a slight regression. But at the moment, the boys are far from this. They've left, they're not in the capital, they're not in any kind of city. They're just in a space where they can be anything.
A sort of parallel world. And of course, it does describe this very interesting moment in Malaysian history, the trajectory of the relatively new country of Malaysia. And it's long been a multi-ethnic, multicultural society where diversity is a characteristic of the population. But in your novel, that doesn't always seem harmonious. There are hints that some communities are a bit wary of outsiders. Is that representative of an otherness that you experienced growing up in Malaysia?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, when I was a child, I really felt no difference between me and anyone else in Malaysia. I just thought I was Malaysian, and that was my only identity. It was only later on in my teenage years that, you know, when I started to hear anti-Chinese insults, that I understood that actually I come from an immigrant Chinese background, which I hadn't really understood before that. And yeah, so we have this going on in the background of the book. The fact that superficially people get along very well in Malaysia, you know, people mix very easily, but at some level there are always tensions. And I wanted to put a name to these tensions, even though the characters themselves are not fully aware of them and they don't articulate them from a day-to-day basis.
And a lot of that diversity comes from migrations that have always taken place in Southeast Asia. It's often referenced in your books, not just this one. It was very interesting here, though, to see climate change as cited as a reason for some of those migrations, and not climate change in the last 10 or 15 years, climate change in the 19th century, the 20th century. Did that seem more of an urgent issue to you, I wondered, in Malaysia, before it became this headline story in the West?
Yes, of course, especially since, this takes place in the countryside. And, you referred to the division between urban living and country living right at the beginning. And I think it's very important to articulate this difference, because if you live in the city, I think you're a little bit more protected from the effects of climate change, whereas when you live in the countryside, you're very exposed to it. And I grew up half and half. I could see half in the city and half in the countryside. And I could see the difference that a certain kind of lifestyle made to you. 1997 was the year of El Nino in Malaysia, where the country was hit by drought that lasted really a full year. And so, I felt that really as a continuation of all the historical environmental destruction that I had heard of growing up in my childhood.
And of course, which is now absolutely on the top of the international agenda. And I was amused by one of the young characters in this novel, Lena. She wants to go to art school, but the parents don't think it will lead to anything worthwhile. I believe that you initially studied to be a lawyer before turning to literature. So I wondered if those family expectations around education and jobs came from a personal place for you.
Well, of course, I think anyone who grows up in an Asian family knows, particularly of my generation, knows the value of that is inculcated into all of us at a very early age. People who come from immigrant backgrounds often want their children to do very solid professional jobs because those are the jobs that are thought to provide the greatest security. Being a writer, an artist, these are really not secure professions. I can attest to that. But it's nevertheless what Lena wants to be. She is a young woman in Asia in the end of the 1990s, really the first of her generation, amongst the first of her generation, who really has choice and who wants to exercise it for her own her own life.
And you see her forging that slightly independent path. I believe that The South is the first in a planned quartet of books, eventually a broader picture of the Lim family. It's a great literary tradition, the sprawling family saga. Here in France, of course, Balzac, Zola did it. Were you inspired by any writers or any series in particular that spurred you to expand this story?
Well, of course, you mentioned Zola. The story of the Les Rougon-Macquart.
Yeah.
Obviously, is foremost in my mind. I don't have anything as expansive on the cards, but yes. The telling of a family saga over many, many years and many pages is something I really wanted to do, but I wanted to break it down into smaller chunks. So what we have in the South, and what I hope we will have going through the quartet, is smaller, more intimate works that present, I think, a more realistic experience of how people move through time, because I think we experience time in a more fragmented and more piecemeal, episodic way nowadays than we used to in the past.
There are certainly characters in here who we meet and we'd definitely like to learn more about in future books. How are you getting on with that?
I'm getting on.
You're on book number 2?
I am on book number 2. That is going quite well. I have to say that I don't know if I can finish the quartet. I hope I will. But I think it's very important for writers to hang on to this feeling of the impossible. That's what drives, I think, all good creative writing, this sense that you're trying to achieve something new and that something new might never happen.
And it will perhaps throw up unexpected treasures as well. Now, finally, we asked you what's on your cultural radar, and you named an exhibition here in Paris which explores the symbolic power of dragons over the centuries. What did you enjoy about this one?
Dragons in Asia, well, very simply, the fact that dragons occupy a very central part of many sort of Asian cultures. And this is a chance to see some of the great treasures of the National Palace Museum in Taipei, in Paris, without having to go to Taipei. So I think this is a great chance.
It certainly looks visually spectacular. Thank you very much for the tip. We'll leave you with a glimpse of that exhibition, Dragons, currently on show at the Quai Branly Museum in Paris. A reminder, of course, that The South is available in English and now in its French translation, Le Sud. Otherwise, do join us next time here on Arts 24, and you can follow us on social media too. There's more news coming up on France 24 just after this.